there is no worst stage. It's just that every stage presents itself, in a different way, every child.
Absolutely.
So what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, it's and you're right. I agree. I think every stage is challenging for its own reasons. I think they're challenging because we don't know what to do, because we don't understand the purpose of the stage.
Yeah.
So in some respects, I would say all the stages are manageable and all the stages are amazing and awesome if we can embrace them for what they are.
Mm-hmm.
So the terrible twos have the name terrible twos for those reasons. I think the 2 to 3 year old phase is quite challenging because it's the first time the child starts to separate and be independent, and mums are often so used to just giving and giving and giving that they actually forget how to step back and be themselves. And as I said before, sometimes they want to pull back too far and go, right, well, that's it. I've given up my life. Now I want to go do my things. There's all this pressure on mums to have a separate life to their family. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that's probably not very fair to either the mum or the child in that way. Teenagers obviously are seen as being that way. These days we're now talking, of course, that 9 to 11 age group as being that pre-hormonal stage, mm-hmm. which is meant to be so difficult. And the reality is it's not pre-hormonal, it's that they become aware of conditionality. Mm-hmm. And so we don't deal, a lot of the times we actually don't help our child deal with it. And that's why it spirals and spirals and spirals and gets harder and harder and harder. And in lots of ways, one of the other parts that I have to say to parents a lot is this idea of never raising your voice, never speaking angrily to the child is actually, I don't even understand where it comes from. Like, you talk about put an expectation of ridiculousness onto parents. Mm. The bottom line is we know that when it comes to communication, the words we speak is a very small portion. Yep. So the tone of voice actually matters. So if we say, I'm very angry with you and I just really, I've had enough and you really need to behave yourself, those words don't mean anything. The child hears that tone that just says, oh, whatever, mum doesn't give a rat's. Mum's just being nice, right? Yep. You actually have to, the key is to not, so I have a saying, we need to stop throwing the baby out with the bathwater. We need to change the bathwater. Okay, baby's fine. So the situation is fine. So the difficulty is that parents wait until they're so angry that they explode to use their angry voice, which they use because they're actually angry. Mm-hmm. Right? I was a teacher for lots of years. You have to put on your teacher voice. You know what the teacher voice is? The stern authority voice that you use when you're not even angry about anything, but you mean business. Yeah. Right? We need to learn to actually set a boundary and implement it. And when the boundary is being broken, we use our stern voice at that time when we're not angry. That's the difference. So many of our personal wounds have come from the fact that our parents have lost the plot and screamed and yelled and hit and whatever and called us names. And those names are usually that we're dumb and stupid and pointless and blah, 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 right? That's what we don't want. Mm-hmm. We need to be able to use the firm tone of I mean business when we're still actually internally calm. Mm. The tone of voice is what the child will respond to. And I think that's a really big part of what parents need to actually recognise is they end up getting to a point where they don't want to be at, which is they explode and then they feel awful. Then they have to come back and apologise. And that's the inconsistency. That's the sort of chaos. That's what makes every stage really difficult. So, and sometimes the other part is when children go off to school and all of a sudden they're influenced by everyone else's value systems, and parents have to deal with that conflicting, I want to raise my children with my belief systems, and all of a sudden the children are exposed to all this thing that they have no control about. That's also a really challenging time as well. Mm-hmm. And that is where parents need to be able to have time to spend with their children and talk about the different ideas that they're hearing to be able to help empower the child to make choices about those things. So I think every age level has its own challenges. Another one that actually happened, worth, that's a shocker, right? It's really, really hard for parents to see their children, and it's around the age of 6 that their brain develops and they start to question, do I have any worth? And it doesn't matter how much you have said and told your child up to the age of 6 that they are totally worthy, right? Doesn't matter how much you say after they're 6. It's in that little age group that they have to question and work it out for themselves. Mm-hmm. And so they look at everyone, and all of a sudden this comparison. How did we learn to compare ourselves to people? Oh, it's because our brain develops this idea that our worth has got something to do in comparison to everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so we learn that when we're 6. Interestingly, it's when we're at school. Mm-hmm. And school starts to do things like comparing who's the brightest, who's the best, who's the whatever. And so our worth gets associated with what we do. And we are not human doings. Right? So we have to empower. I have a little picture of a house. The foundation is our worth. We have our whole house, our self-love, our self-respect, our self-judgments, our self-esteem is all built on the boulder, and the boulder is our self-worth. So I draw that picture for the kids, and I draw that picture for the parents, and I send it home and they stick it on the fridge, and then they start to talk about the self-worth that they have and that they are worthy. Our worth is innate. We are worthy because we exist. What we do is up in the roof. The roof is our doing. It's what we present to the world. That's separate. And the problem is that we live in a society, and I'm going to use the word problem. I'm not going to be cruel and trendy and try and save the challenge, because the problem is we live in a world where we associate our worth with what we do. It's a false association. Mm-hmm. What we do is skills, abilities. They're things we can learn. They're things that we can improve. Our worth never changes. We are worthy, innately worthy. And you know, I often say, you know, a lot of women are challenged by the fact that being at home and raising a child doesn't have worth, value in our society. And because they're not contributing financially to the home, they question their own worth as human beings, you know. And this is where we have to start to split the difference and recognize that we have skills, we may have different abilities, but everyone is worthy. We are all of equal worth, but our skills and abilities can create a whole lot of different values out there. You know, I couldn't go and, you know, run a mile or run in a race and be a, you know, Usain Bolt. I got no ability to do that. That doesn't mean I'm worthless. Yeah. I mean, if I wanted to go out and be an elite runner, someone might need to have a little chat with me about my actual innate abilities, where my skills and talents are. That's what then put them into a direction where they are. Valuing everybody's abilities and skills is a really important role model that parents can do, because that supports a child to absorb in their environment that message that all skills are of value and have some kind of importance and significance in the world, which is a whole other process. But who we are innately is always worthy. We are always of equal worth as a human being. So every stage will have new challenges along the way. And I think if parents start off understanding the role of the child from birth through to 2 and what happens between 2 to 3, because the really scary part is by the time we're 3, all of our emotional habitual responses have been put in place. Right? That's scary. By the time we're 3, how we emotionally respond to the situations we face have already been established. The first 3 years of a child's life is so important. So important, because we're influencing so much about those things. So how we deal with the child trying to get some separation and trying to be an independent person, and how we respond with their emotions, and how we teach them to manage their anger, to manage their ego, because they've got very big sense of self. I'm a bit of a Freud ego person, so I talk about sense of self as ego. When it's inflated and it thinks it's the center of the world and more important than anyone else, yeah, okay, that's that negative ego that we want to talk about. The child must have a sense of self, and it has to be its own independent physical body. You know, but part of that is the 2-year-old has to realize that it is not the most important sense ego. It's not the only person around. So some of the essences that I use are things like quaking grass, which helps all those strong egos learn that we do equally matter as much as everyone else does. And because we matter, there's room for everyone else to matter. Therefore, there's room for everyone. There's space for everyone. So fear of lack, one of the biggest fears that we have in our society is a fear of lack. It starts at this stage. What we do, how we experience that 2 to 3 year old stage determines how abundant we feel and how stuck in scarcity we end up. Because if there's not enough room for me and there's not enough room for everyone else, then all of a sudden there's not enough. That's where that pattern comes from.
That's really interesting.
And you see it in little children. They put one in one hand and one in another, and they stick one spare. We have this innate, like, is there enough for me? And so these emotional wounds that we grow up with stem from our emotional development in our brain at those different ages. And I guess I'll keep saying those same things. Once we understand how the brain grows and what each of those stages are, we can recognise how to work with that to fulfil the child's need so that they know, but we do it in a beautiful way where they get to realise that they matter just as much as everyone else does. So mums have to matter. Mums have to role model that they have time for themselves because they role model to the child that they also have time for themselves. It's a big job. It's a huge responsibility to raise a child.
Yeah.
Huge responsibility. But when we're told false stuff, when we're given expectations that are unrealistic and not actually productive, when we are drowning in the collective lies, then being a parent's really hard, and raising children feels really hard. And it's not the truth. Raising children can be the most exciting, ever-changing, ever-evolving, beautiful experience as we work through that. But we've got to have this information. We've got to become aware of the reality of that growing brain.
I really love how you've reframed the whole perspective we have on raising children and busted all those lies and false beliefs.
Yeah. And I do that every day in my work with parents over and over again, because it is. And the funny part is I'm actually incredibly blessed that my dad and his dad and so this is what's really fascinating, okay? This is the father line.
Yeah.
My pop believed that women were the most important member of society and that mothering was the most important job there was in a society. And that to have well-raised, well-adjusted children, you needed to have a smart, intelligent, balanced, well-respected mum, which meant we had to respect women.
That's really
and we had to respect the role they play. Now my pop was born in 1896, okay? Like not even just this last century, like the century before.
Yeah.
And he grew up in a time where that's not how women were seen. And my dad was born just around World War II starting. So, the late 1930s was when my dad was born. And yet he raised me and had a huge influence on the way that I experienced my world through that belief that women were, in fact, one of the role that women play was really, really important. And although the language I've used is that it's the most important, I don't say that in a competitive let's be better than men stuff, because that's just not my thing. But it is that our role as women in this world is equally important to men. Equally important. Because we have such a valid and important role to play in raising children. And we still, to this day, we still don't celebrate that well. Women are pulled in all sorts of directions. And again, it's a collective lie. It's unfair to children, to women, to families, to relationships, to men. The whole thing, we need to find balance. Society swings from one to the other. Boom, 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 boom. We need to find that balancing point and start to do that. So I'm a bit of a fan for revolutions. I think it's time for a balanced revolution.
Sure.
It's time for emotional balance. It's time for effective emotional management. We need to start to create, and we need to bring value to and importance to and respect to the role of raising children.
Yeah, it's